Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. And if you're new here, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. So, let me ask you something. Today's story is fantastic, about a car that was manufactured a few years ago, made history, sold millions of units on 4 continents, and yet most Americans have never heard of it. Stick with me until the end, because you're going to travel back in time. A car that Turkey, Romania, Argentina, and a dozen other countries used to transport their citizens for generations. We're talking about the Renault 12. Now I know what you're thinking. Renault 12? Never heard of it. And that's exactly why we need to talk about this car. Because while American automakers were focused on muscle cars and giant sedans in the early 1970s, this unassuming French sedan was quietly conquering the world. Here's the context. October 1969. Woodstock had just ended. Apollo 11 took men to the moon, and at the Paris Motor Show, Renault unveiled a simple family sedan that would be manufactured in countries ranging from Brazil to Yugoslavia, from Australia to Colombia. It wasn't a sports car, it wasn't luxurious, but it was exactly what the world needed. Today we're going to explore 13 shocking facts about the Renault 12, a car that proves you don't need a flashy design or lots of power to make history. Sometimes you just need to show up with the right car at the right time. Let's go. Fact 1. The Renault 12 was born from a simple mission. In January 1964, Renault's design team started work on what they called Project 117. The brief was straightforward. Create an economical car that wasn't too sophisticated, had a roomy interior and large trunk, could be easily produced anywhere in the world, was reliable enough for export markets, and comfortable enough for French consumers. The philosophy was brilliance in its simplicity. Renault understood that the world needed affordable, practical transportation. They weren't trying to build the fastest car or the most luxurious sedan. They were building what the world actually needed. The design bridged the gap between the smaller Renault 8 and the larger Renault 16, filling a critical space in their lineup. By the time the car debuted at the Paris Motor Show in October 1969, Renault had created something special. A front-wheel drive sedan with a longitudinal engine placement ahead of the front axle. A simpler and more practical layout than what they'd used in previous models. Orders started pouring in immediately after the unveiling. Fact 2. It sold 2.5 million units globally. Officially? The official production numbers show that approximately 2.5 million Renault 12s were manufactured worldwide between 1969 and 1980. But here's the kicker. That number doesn't include the millions more produced under license agreements. When you factor in the Romanian Dacia 1300 and 1310 models, which were essentially Renault 12s, another 1.96 million vehicles were built between 1969 and 2004. Add in the 3 18,969 Dacia pickup trucks based on the R12 platform, plus roughly 450,000 units built in Argentina, plus production in Turkey, Australia, Brazil, Yugoslavia, and other countries, and the real total approaches somewhere between 5 and 6 million vehicles. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire population of Norway. The Renault 12 family wasn't just successful, it was a phenomenon. Fact 3. The last Renault 12 was built in the year 2000. French production of the Renault 12 ended in 1980, which makes sense. Its successor, the Renault 18, had launched in 1978. But here's what's shocking. The Renault 12 platform continued to be manufactured for another 20 years after France stopped building it. In Turkey, the Oyak Renault joint venture produced R12-based vehicles until the year 2000, 31 years after the original debut. The car underwent a significant facelift in 1989 and was renamed the Renault Toros. It remained Turkey's most popular family car for decades. But even more remarkably, in Romania, Dacia continued producing the R12-based Dacia 1310 sedan and Estate until 2004. The pickup truck version, the Dacia pickup, soldiered on until December 2006. That's 37 years of continuous production of what was essentially the same basic design. Think about that. A car designed in 1964 was still being built in 2006. That's the automotive equivalent of geological time. Fact 4. It became the Ford Corcel in Brazil before the R12 even existed. Here's where things get really weird. In 1968, a car that looked suspiciously like a Renault 12 went on sale in Brazil under the name Ford Corcel. The only problem? The Renault 12 wouldn't be unveiled in France until October 1969, a full year later. The story behind this involves Willys Overland do Brasil, which had been building Renault models under license in Brazil. They were developing what they called Project M, a new car based on the forthcoming Renault 12 to replace their aging Renault Dauphine. But in 1967, Ford do Brasil acquired Willys Overland and inherited the project. Ford kept the Renault design platform and the 1.3-liter Clion engine, but gave the car its own distinctive Brazilian styling. They named it Corcel, which means steed or horse in Portuguese, a deliberate reference to Ford's iconic Mustang. So technically, the Ford Corcel beat the Renault 12 to market by over a year, even though it was based on Renault's engineering. The Corcel became hugely successful in Brazil and evolved through 2 generations before being replaced by the Ford Del Rey in 1981. Fact 5. It was built in at least a dozen countries across 4 continents. The Renault 12 wasn't just a car. It was a genuine world car, decades before that term became fashionable. Production took place in France, Turkey, Romania, Argentina, Australia, Brazil, as the Ford Corcel, Yugoslavia, New Zealand, and Colombia. In Argentina, production at the Santa Isabel plant in Córdoba province ran from November 1971 to November 1994, 23 years of continuous manufacturing. Roughly 450,000 units were built there, including sedans and the brake station wagon. In Turkey, the Oyak Renault factory in Bursa started building R12s in 1971 and became one of Renault's largest production facilities outside Western Europe. The Turkish R12 was even the first Turkish-built automobile to be exported abroad, starting with Lebanon in 1973. Romania's story is perhaps the most remarkable. Dacia secured the licensing rights and produced nearly 2.3 million R12-based vehicles between 1969 and 2006. For an entire generation of Romanians during the communist era and beyond, the Dacia 1300 was their introduction to personal mobility. Fact 6. The Gordini version was a proper performance car. When you think Renault 12, you probably don't think sports car, but Renault had other ideas. In 1970, they introduced the Renault 12 Gordini, and it was no joke. The Gordini packed an all-aluminum 1,565cc engine from the Renault 16 TS, fitted with 2 double-barrel Weber carburetors. Power output was 125 horsepower, seriously impressive for a small family sedan in 1970. It came with a reinforced crankshaft, a 5-speed gearbox, ventilated disc brakes up front, regular disc brakes in the rear, and a specially tuned suspension. Top speed? 115 miles per hour. 0 to 60? Around 10 seconds. Not bad for 1970. The Gordini was instantly recognizable thanks to its distinctive paint schemes, typically pastel colors with double white racing stripes running from hood to trunk. The most famous combination was French racing blue with white stripes, and it looked fantastic. But here's the sad part, only 5,188 Gordinis were ever sold between 1970 and 1974. Compare that to 11,207 units of the Renault 8 Gordini, and you can see why Renault pulled the plug. Still, if you ever come across a Renault 12 Gordini today, you're looking at a genuine collectible. Fact 7. It failed spectacularly in the United States. The American market should have loved the Renault 12. It was bigger than most European economy cars, had decent interior space, got good fuel economy, and handled well. But American consumers never warmed to it. The R12 was sold in the U.S. in 3 trim levels, 12, 12L, and 12TL, ranging from $2,975 to $3,448. That was competitive pricing in the early 1970s. But Renault's small dealer network, fewer than 250 dealers nationwide, and lingering quality concerns from the disastrous Dauphine era haunted the brand. Road and Track magazine's 1974 test was brutal. They criticized the engine's noise, called the heavy non-power steering a serious design flaw, and gave the ventilation system very poor marks. Sales were anemic. In 1976, fewer than 7,000 R12s were sold in the entire United States, a tiny fraction of Renault's 1.2 million global production that year. By 1977, the R12 was dropped from the U.S. lineup. American survivors today are extremely rare, mostly owned by passionate enthusiasts who appreciate the car's quirky French character. Fact 8. Romania made over 2.2 million Dacia versions. Let's talk about Dacia. In 1966, the Romanian government signed a contract with Renault to license produce the Renault 12. This became the Dacia 1300, which debuted at the Bucharest Fair in 1969, the same year as the original R12. For Romania, this car was transformational. It became the people's car, the vehicle that put an entire nation on the road during the 1970s and 1980s. Between 1969 and 2006, Dacia produced a staggering 2,278,691 vehicles based on the R12 platform, including sedans, station wagons, pickups, and even a rare coupe version. The breakdown is remarkable: 1,716,660 four-door sedans, 203,107 station wagons, 318,969 pickups, 7,122 five-door sedans, and 5,141 coupes. Production reached such high local content that by the mid-1980s, 98% of parts were sourced within Romania. The Dacia 1300 became so iconic that it's still celebrated in Romania today as the country's most important automotive achievement. Enthusiasts restore them, classic car clubs are devoted to them, and they remain a powerful symbol of Romanian industrial history. Fact 9. It won Car of the Year in Australia. While the R12 struggled in America, it was a hit down under. In 1970, the Renault 12 won Australia's prestigious Wheels magazine Car of the Year award, one of the most respected automotive honors in that market. The R12 was built in Australia from complete knockdown kits at Renault Australia's assembly plant in the Melbourne suburb of Heidelberg. Production ran from 1970 to 1980. In May 1978, it was even renamed the Renault Virage for the Australian market, featuring twin round headlamps that gave it a slightly different look. Australian automotive journalists praised the R12's spacious interior, comfortable ride, good fuel economy, and practical design. It proved that when marketed properly and supported with decent dealer networks, the Renault 12 could compete successfully against Japanese and domestic offerings. Fact 10. Argentina turned it into a rally champion. The Renault 12 wasn't just a practical family car in Argentina, it became a motorsport legend. In 1978, Argentine driver Jorge Recalde and co-driver Jorge Baruscati piloted a Renault 12 to a celebrated class victory in the grueling South American marathon. What made this victory special was that Recalde finished ahead of cars in the 2-liter category, despite competing in the up to 1,600cc class. Even more impressively, Renault 12s occupied the first 6 positions in their category. This demonstrated the car's fundamental robustness and reliability. Argentina also produced a special R12 Alpine version between 1977 and 1980. Only 493 units were ever made. It featured a 1,309cc engine producing 110 horsepower, a bulbous fiberglass hood, competition-tuned suspension, and custom paint schemes. Top speed was around 109 miles per hour. Contemporary automotive magazines praised its suspension as outstanding and described it as going like on rails. Fact 11. The design philosophy was revolutionary for Renault. The Renault 12 represented a significant technical departure for Renault. Unlike the Renault 4 and Renault 16, which had engines mounted behind the front axle, the R12's engine sat ahead of the front wheels in a longitudinal layout. This placement allowed for a much simpler floor-mounted gearshifter design instead of the dashboard or steering column mounting used in other Renaults. The handbrake was tucked under the dashboard. The suspension used a rigid but lightweight rear axle rather than the four-wheel independent setup of the R4 and R16, a cost-saving measure that also improved reliability. The engine was the iron-cast Cléon unit that had been used since 1962 in the Renault 8 and 10, enlarged to 1,289 cc for the R12. Renault deliberately avoided using the lighter aluminum engine from the R16 to keep costs competitive in the crucial 1,300cc category. Everything about the R12's design emphasized practicality, ease of production, and affordability. And it worked. Fact 12. It inspired a would-be Rhodesian national car. Here's an obscure piece of automotive history. In the early 1970s, a sporting convertible with a fiberglass body called the GNW Duiker was developed in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. It was based on the Renault 12 platform and was intended as the beginning of a Rhodesian national car project. The idea was to create a local automotive industry that could produce stylish sports cars using proven Renault mechanicals. A few prototypes and examples were actually built in 1972. Unfortunately, the project was stillborn. The bankers disagreed with the business plan, and the plug was pulled in late 1972. Today, the GNW Duiker is a fascinating automotive footnote, a reminder that the Renault 12's global reach inspired entrepreneurs even in the most unlikely places. Fact 13. It received early praise, then faded into obscurity. When the Renault 12 launched in 1969, European automotive journalists loved it. They praised its spacious and comfortable interior, its attractive styling, its strong performance, and its low fuel consumption. It was seen as a thoroughly modern, well-engineered family car that offered excellent value for money. Production ramped up so quickly that within the first half of 1970, Renault had to increase capacity to 700 vehicles per day to meet demand. The car was an instant success across Europe, and international interest was immediate. But as the 1970s progressed and newer, more modern designs appeared, the R12 gradually faded from the spotlight. Its replacement, the Renault 18, launched in 1978, was instantly popular and more refined. French production ended in 1980. Today, the Renault 12 is largely forgotten in Western Europe and North America. You rarely see them on the road. But in places like Romania, Turkey, Argentina, and across Africa and the Middle East, the R12 and its descendants remain beloved classics. They're still being restored, maintained, and celebrated by enthusiasts who remember when this modest French sedan represented freedom, mobility, and progress. The Renault 12 never set the automotive world on fire. It didn't win prestigious design awards. It wasn't the fastest car on the road or the most luxurious. But it accomplished something far more important. It provided affordable, reliable transportation to millions of people across dozens of countries for nearly 4 decades. From the factories of France to the assembly lines of Romania, from the streets of Buenos Aires to the highways of Istanbul, The Renault 12 proved that sometimes the greatest success comes not from being the most exciting car, but from being the right car at the right time. It conquered the world not through flashy marketing or outrageous performance figures, but through honest engineering, practical design, and a genuine understanding of what ordinary people needed. In an era of increasingly complex, technology-laden vehicles, the story of the Renault 12 reminds us that simplicity, reliability, and affordability never go out of style. Now I want to hear from you. Did you or someone in your family own a Renault 12? Maybe you grew up in a country where these cars were everywhere. Perhaps you remember seeing them on the streets, or you're one of the lucky enthusiasts who's restoring one today. Drop your stories, memories, and experiences in the comments below. This channel is all about building a community of classic car lovers, and your contributions make that happen. If you enjoyed this deep dive into automotive history, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next video. We're covering forgotten classics, hidden gems, and the stories behind cars that changed the world. And if you learned something new today, show your support by giving this video a thumbs up. It really helps us continue creating this content. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep those classic car dreams alive.